Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be joined here by Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I think we'll have a lot to talk about on space, defense, the whole 9 yards, but you were just recently in Ukraine back in March. We're a pretty big day for the Ukrainians and the Russians, maybe a meeting in Turkey, in Ankara, Istanbul. What's the best hope for what the Ukrainians can get? I know you were hearing they're pretty sick of fighting this thing through.
Yeah, I don't think there's any group of people that want this to end more than the Ukrainians. And when I visited there, you really get the strong sense that this has been incredibly hard on them. I've visited a veterans hospital, talked to about 10 disabled veterans. Most have lost limbs from FPVs, so first-person drones. I think 9 out of 10 of them. One guy was injured from landmines, so the drone technology and the proliferation across the battlefield on both sides is where most of their combat losses are. They want this to end, but they also want Russia out of their country. And they realize, just as I do, and I think most people that take a close look at this, that if this ends where Putin feels like he got something positive out of this, then our allies are at risk. Last year I visited Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, and they all do feel that if Putin is successful here, they will be next.
Well, and of course it has a lot of bearing on the U.S. defense budget and U.S. defense priorities. Of course, the administration released a skinny budget a couple of weeks ago, $896.2 billion rather, with a B, less than keeping up with inflation. There was a lot of criticism even on the Republican side of the Trump budget. How do you think they're going to try and fit in all of these priorities? You have Iron Dome, you have the border, trying to counter
Golden
China.
Dome.
The Golden Dome.
Better than Iron Dome.
How much better?
Because it's golden. We don't know. You know, it's got that's a whole conversation we can have, which I'd like to talk about if you want to take some time on that. But just in general, on the budget, we should be doing and crafting a budget through a normal process, House and Senate, figuring it out. The president presents his priorities. It has not grown with inflation, so it's actually less money. And even when you consider the amount of money in reconciliation that is used for things like Golden Dome and some of the other priorities, it doesn't add up to, or it barely keeps up with inflation. And on top of that, what do you do next year? Is this now going to be the new process of kind of juicing it with a random amount of money at the end of the day? So I also think overall the budget doesn't address things that could really be helpful to DoD, like fully funding USAID. Those cuts, in my view, are really dangerous to our national security. It gives China an opening all across the world, Russia too, and it reduces our influence.
You said a couple of interesting words there, normal process. I mean, is this a normal process? You were critical of Pete Hegseth during his confirmation hearing. Now we're after a month where the Pentagon fired or got rid of 5 top advisors, many of them in the Secretary's office. Is this a normal budget process that we're facing here?
Not a normal administration, not a normal Secretary of Defense. I was talking to a couple of my Republican colleagues about this a few weeks ago, and one of the lines was, well, they wanted unconventional, and this is what we get.
Well,
like a lot of people fired, people who have served their country, all of their adult life, who were doing, by any account, great jobs. General Brown, Admiral Franchetti, and others, but also firing his own staff and the amount of, chaos that creates in any organization. So of course they don't seem to be focused, on the right things. I think Congressman Smith pointed out, what is this, SecDef's office focused on? It doesn't seem to me to be the major priorities we have in our national security. The rise of China, Russia, Ukraine. It's more about books and bathrooms and, stuff that doesn't really matter to our warfighting capability.
Well, I mean, how disruptive do you think this is going to be when you look at some of the big priorities that we were just talking about? Golden Dome. They're spending a lot of money on the border. We don't know how much, but they're shifting things out of different units. They're looking at a major transformation of the Army, the Navy, big consolidation.
Yeah, we've got big problems, and we've got to make some changes. You were talking about shipbuilding. Is certainly one of them. We don't build ships anymore. I've got legislation to try to fix our commercial shipbuilding industry, which could have an impact on naval shipbuilding. That's part of the reason to do it. But having ships to get cargo across the world and not having to rely on China is a national security issue. You mentioned Golden Dome. Boy, this is like the 1980s again. We could spend billions and billions of dollars and get something that isn't effective. It also upsets the entire concept of deterrence, mutually assured destruction. I mean, I would love to be able to build a system that actually worked 100% of the time. It would be incredibly expensive. Today, we have interceptors. We have the ability to shoot down incoming ballistic missiles, 1, 2. It's not incredibly reliable. We've got 44 interceptors. They're in California, they're in Alaska. To build a system over the entire country would be incredibly hard, and we're not sure it's going to work. And in this budget, well, in the reconciliation plus up, there's about $26 billion in there for Golden Dome. That could go towards things like NGAD or the collaborative combat aircraft, which we really need if we want to be competitive in the Western Pacific against China, penetrating their A2AD bubble, which is a big challenge for us. When I was serving in the Western Pacific on the USS Midway around the first Gulf War, this dealing with China was not an incredibly complex thing. Now they are a peer adversary of ours. And the proliferation of systems that they have in space is I think you're going to hear from General Saltzman here in a little bit, but that is a increasingly hard problem for us.
Yeah, I want to get to space in a moment, but it is interesting that you brought up China and just we do not hear a lot about China from this Defense Department. We hear a lot about the border. We've heard a bit about Golden Dome, some of the other priorities, DEI, those sorts of things. We don't hear about China. Is that concerning you?
Yeah, it is. Though we do hear from the president occasionally, but not from DOD. So are they even aligned on priorities? Certainly the border is a big priority of the president. You hear that from DOD. But our biggest national security threat, I'd say medium long term, is China. They invest an incredible amount of money. They're rather innovative now. They used to just steal our stuff. They still do that. But they have now started to invent and innovate on their own. And we've got to keep up. I would say right now, I feel pretty good about where we are. If there was a conflict in the Western Pacific with China, I'm not so sure I'm going to feel good about it in 10 years if we don't continue to make the right investments.
You feel good about it even despite the concern that DOD is maybe off the ball on some of these big issues and these big programs?
Well, leadership matters, and the focus of the national security team does matter. I would say from the warfighter and the capabilities we have, I feel pretty good about it. We need to get everybody focused on what's important.
You brought up the border real fast, and I do want to make sure we touch on that since, of course, you're in Arizona, a border state. Yep. Curious just about the rising price tag on the border mission. We hear a lot about troops driving around in Strykers, doing intelligence missions, the expansion of the Roosevelt Reservation as a quote-unquote right. U.S. base. Where do you think this mission is headed? I mean, is it a no end in sight type of mission?
Well, I hope it isn't, because this is not the role of the U.S. military. You know, I think at times filling gaps makes sense. This is the job of Border Patrol. Let's give Border Patrol the resources. Let them tell us what they need. Where do they need barriers? Do they need more people? Do they need more vehicles? They often ask for technology when I talk to them. You know, they like cameras and sensors, barriers in urban areas. They're in favor of. I think they appreciate the help from DOD. But that's not great for our long-term readiness. You take a battalion and you stick them on the border for 9 months. They're away from their families. They're away from their base. They don't get the same kind of training. what happens 9 months later if we wind up in a conflict somewhere around the world? Are you going to take that unit and send them, right over to the Western Pacific or to Europe? Or are you going to have to send them back to get them up to speed? So in my view, this is a hit on our readiness. Border security is incredibly important. It's national security. But we should be able to do this with the agencies that is their mission.
If you're sending 2 destroyers to the Gulf, that's a distraction potentially from the U.S. global priorities.
Well, which Gulf are you talking about?
The Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America to this president.
Yes, it depends on the Gulf. I'm not sure if you're talking about the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea, or it depends on where you're sending it, and it's not their primary mission.
We have about a minute and a half left, and I know space is a major priority to you as former astronaut. We've seen a lot of proposed NASA budget cuts. I'm curious what you think the impact on that agency could be when you still have a moon mission potentially. We're talking about a lot of priorities there on NASA's front.
Well, you say potentially, so we don't know.
We don't.
That's kind of important, to know what the priority is from the administration. I was there at the inauguration. I heard the president say something about going to Mars. Well, Artemis, which is sending people back to the surface of the moon, was President Trump's program in his first term. This was his plan. We made a change from what we were doing to do that. And we built SLS and Orion, and SpaceX is building Starship and a lander, and Blue Origin has a competition for a lander. There's another consortium that's building a lander. So we have spent a lot of time and money and resources to do that mission. And what's really frustrating to me, when I was at NASA for 15 years, is seeing an administration cancel a program that NASA had been working on, or see Congress cancel it, or sometimes even NASA would just cancel it. We've got the most talented scientists and engineers on the planet. We can do really hard things, but it's impossible to do the hard thing if the administration then takes a right turn and decides to do something else, like go directly to Mars. I know there's people in the administration that would like to see that happen, but I don't think it's fair to the American taxpayer to fund a program, cancel it to do something else. Then you wind up with the next president. Who knows what that person's going to want to do? So we've got to be consistent and stick with the plan.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Senator Mark Kelly, thank you so much. Now I'm going to leave the stage to Dave Brown, the Deputy Managing Editor for Global Affairs, to give a great announcement.
That was